Hi, I'm Hannah Durden and you're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Matt Lewis, Engagement Manager at Paignton Zoo. Paignton Zoo is part of Wild Planet Trust, whose mission is to help halt species decline. They're passionate about making conservation accessible and engaging to people of all ages. And Matt says that the need for action has never been more urgent. A trip to the zoo can provide a pivotal moment for young people to discover how amazing nature is and how we need to protect it for the future. Thanks for joining me today, Matt.
I'm happy to be here.
So best place to start is probably asking about what brought you to Paignton Zoo. Have you always worked in education and conservation?
I've worked in zoos and with animals for probably over 20 years. I didn't always work in conservation. I trained as a marine biologist and then I worked offshore as a fishery scientist for a really brief period before realising that I didn't want to be offshore all the time. So then I went and worked at an aquarium, a public aquarium, doing public education, and then a zoo. And then I worked in taking animals into schools and things like that for 20 years.
Okay, amazing. Do you still do... Does Paignton Zoo take animals in schools?
No,
no, but that was a different zoo.
Yeah, Paignton Zoo doesn't do outreach. Other zoos do, but we don't do outreach with animals. But that was when I was self-employed.
Okay.
Taking animals into schools up in Scotland, so I spent a lot of time up in Aberdeen.
Okay, I bet that's quite challenging.
Yeah, good fun there.
Good fun. What kind of animals did you take into the zoo?
I took in like pythons, bearded dragons, cockroaches, tarantulas, scorpions, and giant African land snails. And at that time up in Aberdeen there weren't any basically no local zoos, so it was quite a good way to chat to children about wildlife and to actually get them to hopefully fall in love with wildlife. It's good fun. 10 years.
That's awesome. So now what does your role as engagement manager involve?
So engagement manager is basically managing the public talks and the public activities and the school talks and activities for the various groups that come to Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoo as well. We get combined between the two zoos, we get about 500,000 visitors a year. And we're trying to talk to them in a fun way to add to their day and to try and get them to fall in love with wildlife and to help us in our fight to help halt species decline, basically. So we want to get them to fall in love with
That sounds like you've got quite a lot on your plate to be managing.
Yeah, it's a small team, but we're quite busy most of the time. And it's things like, with the public, we're doing talks and games and what we call hotspotting, which is just where you go into an enclosure and actually point out the animals and help people to understand them better.
Okay, cool. And do you split your time between Paignton and Newquay?
A bit, but I'm based at Paignton, and I get down to Newquay as often as I can, but realistically there's a limit because we're busy here with schools and they're busy there with schools. So. Yeah,
awesome. So obviously you've got a lot of experience with young people visiting the zoo, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but how do you find it when you talk to them about the challenges we're facing in terms of species decline and climate change? Are they kind of engaging and caring, or, I mean, obviously it depends on ages, which is what we were saying earlier, but what's the kind of reaction you get from the kids that you're working with?
I think a lot of the pupils who visit have got a basic understanding or have certainly come across the problems that are facing wildlife and climate change and biodiversity loss. So they've come across the ideas that the wildlife is in trouble, but actually coming here to the zoo they care, but I think coming to the zoo actually helps them to understand that this is that animal that is in trouble in the wild. So when we're talking about giant tortoise or a macaque or a giraffe, is that they've come to the zoo and they can then picture it in their mind more fully than when they just see it on TV. Yeah. So they understand it as a living being better. Yeah. So I think they've got a lot of children now have got a good awareness of the problems that are going on in the world, but not actually realising that they're real and they're affecting real live animals.
Yeah.
It's like an abstract concept.
It's just something they see on David Attenborough.
Whereas coming here to the zoo makes it real, makes it understand that giraffe's cousins are in trouble in the wild. So. Yeah.
And are you finding certain ages are more kind of open to it than others?
Sadly, it's a well-known problem that teenagers don't visit the zoo as much, but they also suffer a big sort of drop in nature connection. So in terms of when we're looking at pupils and how well connected they are with nature, that in primary school you see sort of interesting changes over time. But at secondary school, there's a big loss in the connection with the natural world.
Yeah.
But they're the same children who don't visit us here, so it's quite difficult to reach out to those groups.
What kinds of things do you do to try and engage in with them a bit more, those older groups?
Well, with secondary pupils, it's a problem full stop actually getting them here because of the pressures of the modern curriculum, and school performance is actually, for the schools, trying to get the students here is a problem for them. And for us, we will happily talk to them, but actually getting them to join in on the conversations. I hadn't even thought about that,
getting them even into the zoo in the first place,
And when they're here, trying to get them to talk to us rather than just, toddle off with their friends.
Mess around with their friends,
It's another problem.
It must feel quite rewarding when you do get some good conversations with the teenagers.
Yeah, we get some really good chats from the teenagers once they're engaged, and perhaps when they're in smaller groups. So today I was talking to some large groups of secondary pupils. It's quite difficult to break through that front that you have to. Whereas when we've got a smaller group of secondary pupils, even the same students today, when I saw them in smaller groups, were much more chatty. Yeah. But the problem for us is that we're dealing with large numbers of pupils here, and often the best way to deal with them is in small groups. But we can't do that without lots and lots of stuff.
Counterintuitive, yeah. If I'm guessing you've got like a set of different kind of subjects that you talk to them about. Are there any in particular that they kind of like the more kind of sexy topics for them to go, oh, this is exciting?
Well, for the teachers and for primary kids, then you're talking about habitats and food chains and rainforests, so the classic core subjects that teachers will often approach us and ask if we can link to. And we can link to those, but from my point of view, I think with the older pupils, then climate change is really neatly illustrated up at our giant tortoise exhibit. So when you've got the tortoises there, and you can talk about the fact that if there is a change in the temperature, it can affect the ratio of males versus females that hatch out of the eggs.
Okay.
So you've got a species there that is really directly affected. Now, if I get this the right way around, the warmer it gets, the more females you get hatching. And that should be a good thing in terms of the survival of the species. But of course, there's a point at which you need a certain number of males. But also, our tortoises come from Aldabra, which is a low-lying atoll. So if sea levels rise and you get more extreme weather events, then the potential for that population being affected in the wild by rising sea levels is really high. Kind of interesting to take two topics, climate change and sea level rise, that were really neatly illustrated by one species. And we can introduce that species to the students by name, like we have Elvis and Timmy and Miley and Dora, and we can say that these animals in the wild would be affected by these concepts.
And they might not survive in the long term. Who named them, by the way?
The keepers normally name the animals. Sometimes they have reasons behind them. But Dora, for example, is Dora the Explorer because she was found climbing over rocks and managed to be found toddling off down the pathway.
Oh, okay.
We now have more
security.
More fence in the way to keep Dora from exploring.
Oh, that's quite funny. When I visited the zoo recently with my children, I think we did one of your workshops, and you were mentioning that after COVID you'd start to take a lot of the workshops outside, whereas previously they might have been inside as a matter of kind of necessity because of all our regulations that happened around that kind of time. But you were saying then that you've kept a lot of them outdoors. Do you find it to be a more kind of engaging experience outside? Why have you kept them majority outdoors?
COVID forced us outside because we weren't allowed to do the sessions indoors. It also, for the zoo, as a charity, we lost lots of income and lots of our reserves. As a charity, we're not allowed large reserves, but the money we'd saved up for new enclosures went on simply surviving. And after surviving COVID, we had a very reduced team, especially in education. So we were then faced with having groups that wanted to visit the zoo again, but we couldn't talk to them inside, and there were fewer of us. But that also gave us a chance as a kind of smaller team to reinvent the way we were talking to groups. So we started meeting groups of students at enclosures. So when a school group came in, instead of them coming into a classroom, we would meet them at the giant tortoise enclosure, we'd meet them at the giraffe enclosure, and we found that we were having a much better response and a better experience with the pupils doing that. Now, when I did teacher training up in Scotland, like a few years ago, then outdoor learning was being pushed quite strongly up in Scotland, and there were one of the schools I trained in had a forest school, and I could see sort of clearly, even when early on, I could understand the advantages of taking children out into a different environment. But the strange thing is that having seen that, when I was here at the zoo, we would often teach children in a classroom.
Yeah.
And when COVID made us move outside, you then thought, well, why were we talking inside all along?
Yeah, well,
why am I showing a primary child a PowerPoint slide of an animal when we've got the real animal just outside? But because we were trying to deal with large numbers of children, and also because the teachers had, I guess, the teachers who were coming here expected us to teach in classrooms. When we said, well, we'll do it outside, it's taken a short time, but I think most teachers now are happy with the way we're meeting them at an enclosure. Yeah. And we're able to say, look at that giraffe behind me.
It's more authentic.
Much more authentic. And for the kids, for the pupils, I think it's much more engaging and stimulating. So I do wonder why
did it start inside at the beginning? Yeah. Maybe it's just a legacy thing.
Yeah, I think that you settle into patterns and generally accepted ways of doing things, and it's much more convenient to teach children inside here. In this room, I know your listeners can't see it, but in this room we've got a collection of skeletons and artefacts that we can't really take out around site.
No.
But we ended up in here all the time with children, telling them to sit still, be quiet, not touch. And when we're out and about, we rarely have to tell children to sit still and be quiet because they don't need to be, but also because we've got the animals there, they're generally much more engaged.
They're more interested anyway, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Scotland's always been ahead of the rest of the UK, hasn't it, in terms of education? I think they've been pushing outdoor learning for a lot longer than England has.
I don't know, because my limited experience with classroom teaching was in Scotland, and they were, my lecturers and sort of mentor teachers at the time were big fans of outdoor learning, and it's strange, particularly here, we've seen at the zoo, we've seen that when you take groups where perhaps the children were struggling to concentrate before, when you then take them to another enclosure, they are listening perfectly well without you having to tell them to sit still, be quiet and watch.
Well, I guess there's less distractions in some way, and it doesn't matter if they're bouncing on their feet a little bit when you're outside and things.
No, and also just historically there would have been basically a small charge for sessions that we ran indoors. That's more difficult if you're dealing with a smaller group. So if we're dealing with smaller groups out and about in the zoo, it's really easy for us to meet them, chat to them for 15 minutes. It takes up very little of their day. And I think we generally get our message across more clearly and hopefully better received with the kids. So more questions too, right? So,
more questions because they can see the animal, or what's that animal doing, or why is he eating that, or whatever. And you get to know the personalities, don't you, of which animals are more confident.
And that can really help us if we're trying to take a person and we want them to feel the same way that we do about animals, or we want them to at least understand what's going on in the world and hopefully feel more fondly about it. So when we can introduce our tortoise and say this is Timmy and tell the story of how Timmy came here, then the children can hopefully link to that animal as an individual, and then hopefully that will carry across.
I remember going to the aquarium and hearing about their, I don't know whether it'd be a turtle or a tortoise.
Turtle,
and their story, and my kids talked about it for like a month afterwards. Like, isn't it sad what happened, and isn't it good that you got rescued and stuff? But that kind of thing sticks with them, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's a fine line, because obviously some people would say, well, you're being anthropomorphic, but actually, if you know that animal and you can tell the story of it, then that story is much more easy for the child to remember, to get their head around. So
and I see the anthropomorphism. I can't say that word, but that criticism. But on the other hand, animals do have personalities, don't they? Like you are going to get ones that are more cheeky and interact with the keepers, and ones
there's research at the minute that's coming out that's showing a lot more of a lot better understanding of the emotions that animals feel. When previously we would have said, oh well, you can't say that animal is feeling that because you can't know. Well, now we know that you can know that animal is feeling distressed, in pain, or happy.
Particularly your primates, I'm guessing?
But actually, strangely, we tend to, when we're meeting groups outdoors, we don't often meet them at the primates. I think just partly the way that our animals are and are displayed, we often meet them at, giant tortoises would be a favourite one. I suppose lemurs would be the primate we use a lot, because there's a really interesting conservation story there right now happening in Madagascar. So,
is there?
Yeah. So ringtail lemurs are one of the most familiar animals. If you show a picture of one to a child, they will know instantly. It's
from the film, probably.
Yeah, it's King Julian. But in the situation in Madagascar with civil unrest and drought caused by climate change has meant that the number of ring-tailed lemurs has just plummeted in the last 20 years. So really, they think there are fewer than 2,000 ring-tailed lemurs left in the wild.
Wow.
So there are more in zoos and wild animal parks than there are in the wild, which is disastrous.
Yeah.
You know.
So what, in terms of obviously the Wild Planet Trust trying to halt species decline, what practical things can that kind of trust do to try and improve that? Like, is there much they can do beyond keeping them in zoos? Or?
So we've got the classic ARC populations here, things like the ring-tailed lemurs and also Socorro doves and lots of other species that we're working with, which we're holding safe captive populations of. But also we are working with projects in the countries where the animals are found. So Wild Planet Trust at the moment is concentrating on a lot of projects in Africa. So we're dealing with, there's a forest reserve in Nigeria that we help to fund the patrols for. It's called Omo Forest Reserve, and that's one of the homes of the forest elephant, the third species of elephant. We also work with a project another example would be in Zimbabwe. We work with Dambari, which is a wildlife conservancy that helps to look after rhinos. So we help to fund anti-poaching patrols there. And we've been working in Tanzania with a project there to conserve basically rare antelopes and amphibians. So we've got a number of projects like that.
Going on, yeah. So it's just kind of funding people that are on the ground doing stuff.
But I think also, importantly, the people who come to the zoo are the ones that we stand the best chance of hopefully engaging with and then getting them to, be more supportive of the problems that are facing wildlife. Yeah.
What I think this is one of my questions for later on, but I was just going to ask about it now while we were talking about it. Like, how can the average person kind of help with these conservation efforts? Like, would it be a case of helping what's on their doorstep rather than trying to make an impact on something that's on the other side of the world? I
think the single most important thing is to do something, and to do it soon. So there's some evidence that basically when people do something to try and help nature, they start to see themselves as people who help nature. It's a mindset shift. So instead of just being that the problems that nature has will be solved by someone, if you start doing things, whether that is planting a tree or helping to clean up a beach or at the supermarket choosing something with sustainable palm oil in it, then you're growing a habit or starting a habit that will grow. And then hopefully that person will become more likely to help protect nature, more likely to see themselves as somebody who helps protect nature. And I think that's really important because what you want is that growing shift towards, or that growing culture of people caring for wildlife.
And I guess the more people that do it, the more their friends and family are going to be influenced by what they're doing. Yeah,
so when you're having a family argument about something and you say, well, no, hold on, that's not true because, we need to reduce the amount of plastic we're using because of this problem in the ocean, then that even if it's a child having that argument at home, it makes people think about what they're doing, about their impact. So I don't know if it'll all work,
but
I hope
try,
it was. And if we don't try, then nothing's going to happen.
No, exactly. And I was thinking about shifts that happen without us realising, because I think when I was a child, like 20 years ago, I don't remember there being recycling for cardboard and plastic and things. I just remember everything going in the bin, and now you think everyone recycles, literally, well, maybe there are, not everyone, but it's, majority of people do their recycling now, and you think that's a big shift in 20 years, that's a big impact, isn't it?
Yeah, and that sort of cultural norm is maybe the way we need to tackle other
and plastic bottles, everyone knows that not to buy them if they don't have to, type thing, whereas 10 years ago it wasn't such a thing, was it?
So, exactly that. So.
Making those changes. And I guess for you guys working with children and young people, they're trying to influence their parents and the adults in their life if they've come, and often they might go home and go, Mum, did you know this? And
and it's difficult because if you explain it clumsily, as I often do, it's about
I'm sure that's not true.
Going home and nagging your parents to ask them to look for this. Of course, then some parents would be saying, well, why is this man at the zoo telling us to look out for sustainable palm oil? But if you can start that conversation, at least the person is thinking about it, at least the pupil or the parent at home is actually thinking about what sustainable means, what.
Yeah, and then the next time in the supermarket they might go, oh, it's only 50p more, I'll do that. Or,
small changes.
Small changes, I'm going to circle back from conservation to the education kind of work that you guys are doing. Obviously there's lots of ways to do workshops. in regards to like teaching and or facilitation of
Yeah.
sharing of information. What do you, I mean, obviously, this is going to depend on the age of the people you're working with, but what kind of, do you find the most effective way to engage with them? Like, I mean, most of us know that kids don't really like to just be talked at. What's your kind of approach? What's your method of delivery that you like to use?
There's conflict here because we're, as a big, busy visitor attraction, sorry, my stomach's rumbling.
No, that's fine.
As a big, busy visitor attraction, we're trying to deal with large numbers of pupils and the general public. But the flip side of that is that the best way for us to be dealing with groups is in smaller groups.
Yeah.
And possibly smaller than the classes they're arriving in.
They can be in, yeah.
But for us, we really have to deal with them as a class unit or as a unit of people, even as an audience, if we're talking with the general public. And I know that really we should be dealing with them in smaller groups.
So that's quite challenging.
Yeah, and that there's a conflict there. But that said, is we have changed the way we do the workshop. So instead of it being a workshop, it's normally now that we'll meet you for an informal chat at an enclosure. And we set the pupils some challenges at the start of the day. So on arrival, we'll set challenges for them. One is normally something like to look out for a critically endangered species, and we'll show them the rainbow that they need to look out for, that indicates where the animal is on the conservation spectrum. But then we'll also set another challenge. So I'll often carry a mystery object in my pocket, and it'll be something like maybe a whisker from a tiger.
Yeah.
And I'll show the children it at the start of the day, and I'll say, you'll see this somewhere on your visit, keep your eyes peeled. And what we're trying to do is get them engaged in looking, not
Do you say
reading.
a whisker from a tiger?
Yeah, so something like that. And if we can get them to engage, they're not looking for answers, they're not jotting things down on a worksheet, because worksheets mean you're looking down, not looking up.
Yeah.
But if they're looking for that, and then they see me later on, they say, "Oh, I've seen the mystery object. It was a..."
Yeah.
And so
that sounds like a really tricky one. I'm stuck on that.
But there's others. But they sometimes, quite often, they'll get it right.
Yeah.
But what hopefully you've done there is actually getting the kids to look around as they're here. So they're then active in their learning. They're looking around, trying to answer the questions, but without them ending up filling in a worksheet, which is not what we want.
No. And we'll probably go in the bin when they get home anyway.
Yeah. So in answer to your question about how have we sort of changed the workshops or the approach that we take, is I've found that having these challenges has been really good fun way of getting the kids engaged in the learning process. But also that means that then when you meet them later on, you've got more dialogue with them, because instead of it being me just chatting at them as I'm talking at you now, it's me asking them, have you seen? Have you guessed?
Yeah.
What do you think? And I know we should have more dialogue, like it should be a long discussion about the problems the animals are facing in the wild, but a lot of it, of course, is us. We have to quickly tell them about the problems. But by then getting them to spot a critically endangered species, they're getting them involved in the process as well.
Can have a look, and then they can see other animals, and once they're looking at that rainbow of what did you say?
Yeah, sort of conservation status. When on our signs we use a rainbow, well, it's not a rainbow, but we use a spectrum to show where a species is, and for us, like getting children to look at and understand a little bit about that, and talking about what being endangered means. And
sometimes it's surprising which ones are more endangered than others. I remember going around and I can't remember which one I thought, and I thought that was fine, but obviously it's not.
There can be some surprises. And I think the other thing we do as well, we take along a lot of props. So typically, if I was doing a talk at a big cat enclosure, then I would take along a replica of a big cat skull. Yeah. And then I might take along either a replica of a cheetah skull, which then shows how tiny and fragile it is. So you can talk about like speed or competition, or like roles within the ecological system. You've got things like that, or you might take along something completely different, like an ostrich egg. The kids can see something different, big, interesting. Yeah, we saw a prop at the giraffe enclosure, and I can't remember what it was now. It might have been a vertebra. Yes, I think so. It was huge. Talking at certain enclosures, we've got some props, just a few that we can actually pass around to touch. So if I was chatting about snakes, and we've got snake skins that you can pass around. And that, I think, is magic, because then you're unlocking that sensory side of things. Yeah. So with, perhaps snake skin is a really good example, because you can see it, touch it, feel it. It helps to drive a bit of a different experience into the child's head.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. What kind of challenges do you... I'm just thinking back to the teens again, because I've talked to quite a few people who work in either conservation or kind of these kind of wildlife-y, they're kind of half attraction, half educational things. And it's always the teens that people say are like the ones that present, like younger kids are like just enthusiastic, aren't they? They're happy to be outside of the classroom, they're happy to be engaged. So what kind of challenges would you set the teenagers at the beginning of the day? Same things or
often
slightly different?
It depends. If they're studying something, it may provide a clue as to what challenge we can set them. So, with certain classes, I might get them to look for the extinct in the wild species. So we care for one species that's extinct in the wild. Can you find it? With other ones, with different ages of children, I might get them to, or different ages of student, I might get them to choose which animal they would want to be at the zoo.
Yeah.
With secondary pupils, you could be saying, well, choose an animal that you think your friend could be, because it introduces a bit of an element of humour into it.
Yeah.
Or looking for enrichment examples is quite a good one, because if you're looking for a way in which we've improved the animal's life, it shows how much care the keepers go for.
Yeah, because I guess if teenagers are cynical about zoos, which some of them are, then that's a nice way to be like, no, we really care for animals.
Yeah, and then you're getting them to look around and realise that how much effort the keepers really do put into it. I think often with the teenage audiences, I would choose a bigger prop, which is very sad to admit that you're just trying to, using something bigger to make them go wow. But
but it works.
It works, yeah. So using like a croc skull or something like that is always quite impressive.
Yeah.
And quite often it's just getting students to actually start talking to you.
Yeah. Awesome. So you guys have got for people that don't know, it's your centenary this year, isn't it?
100 years.
100 years, which seems absolutely mad, doesn't it? Like, I was thinking about it when I saw it, because someone said, it can't be 100 years that the zoo's been open. And I said, no, I think it is. It seems like a really long time.
Yeah, so Herbert Whitley started this zoo 100 years ago.
So was he a conservationist or an explorer?
No, he was. Basically, his family had made a lot of money in brewing.
Okay.
And
beer?
Yep.
Okay.
And part of the Green King family or business, and they had made their money in that. But when Herbert and his family moved to Devon and moved into a nearby house, then his collection grew and grew, and then he
his
opened
collection of animals.
He opened it to the public in 1923.
Okay.
And it's grown a lot since.
Yeah,
both in terms of collection and in terms of numbers of people we get. So.
And also in terms of the purpose, I guess, of the zoo.
He had a big argument at the start with the taxman actually about the fact that he thought the zoo was a place of education. So he basically refused to pay an entertainment tax on the admissions and said that the zoo was a place of education. Okay. And that if the HMRC didn't recognise that, he was going to shut the zoo. So he shut the zoo for a number of years.
Oh, did he?
And then, but basically he's been arguing about it being education since. And I think now we talk about it being more important to engage with people, like just to get people thinking, rather than, I don't want them to learn more about the animals, so that's wonderful, but I do want them to think more. Yeah,
well, that's still kind of education, isn't it? Though, like different skills, critical thinking, and
and just actually linking between the real world issues and what they see here.
So for people that don't know, you're doing this Schools Go Free to celebrate, which now seems even more appropriate if he was arguing about education. So your year is getting quite busy, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we've had a really good take-up on the offer. So when we were talking about ways to celebrate or to mark our centenary, one of the ways that was chosen was for us to admit school pupils. So basically school pupils here, 5 to 16 years, and at Newquay for free for this year. We've been very busy, and but it's been I know that we've spoken to a lot of pupils
that you wouldn't have otherwise spoken to,
who may have travelled from further afield, but also there's some schools that simply could not afford to.
I was saying budget cuts; they just couldn't do it. Yeah,
and that's been really nice to hear teachers say we wouldn't have been able to come here today. It's sad to hear, but it's obviously nice for us to know.
Yeah, nice to know you've made an impact for them. Yeah. So that will be for the rest of the year, and then you'll
the breather sigh relief.
Have a month off to relax before you.
Yeah, we're a small team, and I think the load, the consistent number of people that we're getting through at the moment to meet is really quite challenging. When for that person, for that learner, it's their day at the zoo, and I want them to know that I'm excited about wildlife, and I want them to feel that. Yeah. But of course, when you've done it
5 days a week for
and it's been a busy year, but I think we still get that across. I think it's still people understand.
Will it calm down a bit in the summer holidays in the sense that you won't have the school groups? I mean, obviously you'll have more tourists, but
then my team will be busy doing the general
general talks. And so the general talks, are they more like that kind of 10 minutes of information and then some time for questions?
Like they're very short, very informal, chatty talks. We're really aiming for sort of conversation rather than. We don't want people to learn from the talks, but we do want them to understand a little bit more. Yeah. That's difficult in terms of balance, because obviously you want people to know about your animals a little bit, but you want them to know about the issues in the wild. Yeah. With every species that we're talking here at the zoo, we wouldn't mention conservation in every talk. So if it's not the most important factor with that species, or if we can do that, we'll try and make sure that talks have different subjects. Yeah. And not always
doing the same thing.
Talking about the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. I think we've probably covered most of the things I wanted to talk about today. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about today that we haven't covered? Anything about the zoo that you wanted to tell us? We pretty much covered it.
I think sometimes it's a bit more challenging for us with the activities that we run. So here in the classroom, is if we were when we were planning an activity, that we can run certain activities that we cannot take out into the zoo. Yeah. We have very limited covered spaces, so a lot of outdoor schools, forest schools, will have a sheltered area. Yeah. We really struggle around the zoo to find sheltered areas where we can talk about the animals. Yeah. So that's one thing. Longer term, we probably need more sheltered areas.
Yeah, some tarps.
Yeah, basically, and trying to do that in a way that's appropriate for a big visitor attraction is quite difficult.
Accessibility and things. Yeah.
Yeah, so having some nice areas under cover would be good, but. When I'm talking to children about marine plastic pollution, we do a session called Plastic Oceans, and in the classroom we can use real beach-found litter, and the children sort through it, and we talk about the story of how it got into the sea. To do that out on site would be really difficult.
Really challenging, yeah.
So I think we will still have to offer some sessions indoors, the ones that are most appropriate. But I've been really happy about moving outdoors. Yeah. It's so much better to show a real giraffe than it is to show a PowerPoint.
And I was saying, when it's... raining, will you still go outside when you can?
Yeah, because the kids normally come in pretty well.
Anyway. Yeah.
Clothed, it's me. I'm the weakling.
But... Just to keep running back to get your coat from the car.
Yeah, and of course, if it does start raining, very recently I was talking up at the giraffes, which is the most exposed end of the zoo, with very little shelter nearby.
And it's quite high up, isn't it? So
and I did not have a coat. And as I started talking, the rain started and it didn't stop. And of course... For those children, they stood there getting drenched. They were doing the best they could to listen. Yeah. I couldn't just move it somewhere else.
No, you have to just do it,
So there'll always be challenges on a...
But then they'll probably remember that even more.
Yeah. The day that
it's a fun experience.
Mad Nutter talks to them about giraffes in the French
while shivering. Yes. And I mean, like as you were saying about having to do some of them inside, it's just a compromise, isn't it? And there are some things that are more appropriate. Like if you've got a big tray of plastic litter, like you don't want that flying around the zoo.
No. But I think maybe COVID made us reassess where we do it, and it just broke the habit of always being in the classroom. Yeah. I think sometimes we will need to come back into the classroom.
Yeah, but it helps you think outside the box a bit more.
Yeah, and also it made us realise that some of the workshops that we were doing inside were fun, and they were the ones the children were enjoying. So we've recently, Joe, my colleague, launched an escape room type activity, which is we call Conservation Conundrum. And so Joe came up with this really neat series of challenges that link into the problems of palm oil. Okay. And that would be very difficult to run out on site. Yeah. But it's not a chalk and talk classroom session.
Sounds really fun.
But really good fun, but very, very hard work to run because your brain is having to whir away and try and keep up with the children. Yeah. But maybe that's the way we need to go. Just thinking about what sessions are best and where they're best to run. And where they're outside, wonderful. We've got 2 nature reserves next door that we own, that we could be using as well. So maybe.
So watch this space to see how it develops.
Yeah, maybe.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today. I know you're super busy. You've had lots and lots of children on site today and young people. I'm wove my way past them to get here. But I'm just going to ask 3 last questions. I've been asking everyone these, and it's a nice way to finish. And my first one is, how do you relax?
Mostly by being outdoors, which
Yeah.
is very relevant for you.
Yeah.
But in truth, most of my relaxing time is, when I'm thinking about it, is out in the great outdoors, paddleboarding, kayaking,
Yeah.
climbing, cycling,
All those
whatever,
things. Yeah.
fresh air.
Excellent. And what are you reading or listening to right now?
In a complete break from the norm, I'm reading a thriller, which is by Frank Gardner, the BBC security correspondent,
Okay.
called Crisis, and I would never normally read that. I read loads of books about travel and climbing,
Yeah.
but I was persuaded to try.
And is it good?
Yeah, really
Yeah?
good. Yeah.
Bit of a break. And why is being outdoors important to you?
I think it's a place where I can often get a clarity or just a lack of the hubbub that I appreciate. It's not about peace and quiet necessarily, but quite often I get a lot more clear thinking outside.
Yeah.
I like having a horizon to look at,
Yeah.
and I like having a view, and I like some clear air and cold water and things. So
Yeah. Excellent.
I'm sure a lot of your listeners will feel the same.
Yes, yeah, I think so. But everyone always answers this question a little bit differently, so I always like to ask it anyway.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Matt.
Thank you. Cheers.
A big thank you again to Matt for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us to talk about conservation, about how the zoo approaches education and how they're celebrating their 100-year anniversary. We really enjoyed chatting to you, Matt, and we hope that those of you listening enjoyed it as well. If you did enjoy the episode, we'd love it if you would rate it, subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends so that more people can find us. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, thanks for listening.